Hello and welcome to Profiles in Risk. This is your host, Tony Cañas, proudly wearing my Rise Insurance, the best industry to work in shirt today, which is my favorite shirt, and I'll wear it until it like falls apart and my girlfriend says that I have to throw it away, or that I should throw it away. And today I have with me Timo Loescher, VP of Strategy at DMI. Timo, first of all, thank you for joining me today. How's it going today?
It's going well, and I I love the shirt. I was InsurTech Insights last year on a panel where me and my panelist group coined "Insurance is sexy," which is a similar vibe
Oh,
of
um, they actually make that shirt too. I have it.
Oh, really?
I do have it. Yes. In fact, I think what it says. I'll try to remember to like edit it in and show it here to for the listeners. I think what it says is I make insurance sexy. So I have it. I never wear it because it doesn't quite fit my brand. But if you're the right person, it's a fantastic shirt, and I do agree. Insurance is very sexy, and we just don't get credit for it. So for the listeners, I'm pitching the second in a double header today. So I already recorded one earlier today. We are recording on July 8th, so coming off the 4th of July holiday, and basically, like most people in our industry, had 4 days off. We had family in town, so a lot of partying and stuff. And I'm trying to get my brain back in place today, right? So Timo shared that he has toddler and young baby. Uh, so
Yeah, new
so
twins,
so new
twins.
twins.
So we're
Congratulations on that. So
yeah
basically,
we're
that's
coming back from a different kind of exhaustion from the
yeah. So
holiday.
so so three kids under four, basically.
Under three, we had three under
Three.
two when the twins were born. That our toddlers just turned two.
All right. So yes. So he hasn't slept in about 3 years, and yet, uh, we started planning for this recording, which we do just a few minutes before starting to record. I basically walked him through the whole like how I'm going to interview you about your company, and then he reminded me at the end that the reason we're chatting today is completely different. Okay, so basically, Timo and I connected at the what was that name? It was Emma's
It
event,
was
right?
a, it was a webinar, a LinkedIn webinar.
Yes, Emma's
Um,
LinkedIn webinar.
yeah,
That I think it was called something earthquake. Uh,
weathering the storm or
Weathering the
something like that.
Storm.
Yeah.
It was a fantastic event. I was so impressed with LinkedIn Live. And basically, Timo asked this really good question, and I want to literally read it for you because that is the base of our discussion today. Okay. Quote, related to the talent gap topic, one of my pet use cases for Gen AI, I think is fascinating, collecting data from appetite guides, company profiles, pricing decisions, compliance work, explaining decisions on opportunities, etc., and ultimately profitability to train a model on how you want underwriters to think, then allow new talent to learn, and learn is in quotes, from this model, not just a Q&A model to consult, but to spin up mock scenarios and then provide coaching based on how the underwriters responded. It's super exciting what AI can do outside the immediate gut focus on automation. Okay. So fantastic comment. I messaged him immediately. He agreed to come on the podcast. I wrote the book on how to engage millennials with an insurance. I do a lot of speaking on that topic. Currently writing the book on how to engage Gen Z with an insurance. Okay. And my big passion is basically insurance careers. I run chatwithtony.com, which is free career advice for insurance professionals. I co-founded Insurance Nerds, which is a blog about insurance careers and technology. Uh, I run a recruiting firm in this space, right? I'm deeply in this space. At the same time, I'm a techie. I don't have a computer science degree because I couldn't cut the math, but that's what I started college in. And I ended up graduating with a degree in management information system. I've never worked in IT though. But I've been paying attention to AI for a long time. And for several years, I said, I don't know if I ever said it on the podcast, I might have, but for several years, I said that, quote unquote, if AI hits an exponential curve, the way that computing hit it in the late 80s, or mobile computing, meaning like or cell phones in the 2010s, the world will radically change for white collar professionals, and all bets are off. What do we do at that point? We'll need UBI or something, right? Okay. So now it's been what, a year and a half since ChatGPT really hit the scene, and about 3 weeks since ChatGPT 4.0. Okay, so now every other interview I do on this podcast is a company claiming to do Gen AI. Right, it's a new buzzword.
Yeah.
So Timo, talk to me about this Gen AI and insurance talent.
Yeah, so maybe to kind of set the stage a little bit, I'll share a little bit of my background and context as to why I think about this. Um, so my background is user experience design and product, the digital product strategy. I know product strategy means very different things depending on where you're at in insurance. But digital product strategy, um, and I've been in consulting for about a decade. Um, and over the last half of that decade, started working with one of our closest clients, our biggest clients at DMI, which is a digital transformation services firm, um, which is a tier one PNC carrier. I especially work a lot with our stakeholders in the mid market, large commercial risk, surety, um, specialty lines, all that kind of business insurance. And in that, I've done a lot of different things in both driving kind of large programs for underwriting and for customer portals, as well as internal operations. Um, but that's so I've been very focused on the insurance side for a while. Um, but broader than that, my organization had, like every organization, had done a number of reorgs, and we eventually over time built out this sales vertical, which is finance, insurance, healthcare, life sciences. And so based on my expertise, my background, my passion for like the human side of digital transformation, which is what I think makes transformation a success, I've moved into kind of supporting our sales vertical in these kind of regulated industries to figure out what's the best way of bringing digital into these organizations. What are the biggest problems they're facing? How do we bring non-technical things like UX measurement, change management, et cetera, in to marry with the technical to make them useful and valuable? And then I both guide how our salespeople should be bringing those to market. So kind of marketing, collateral, thought leadership, stuff like that. And then ultimately they then bring me in to meet with executives. And so I have those kind of senior relationships with kind of advisory function. And you can imagine in a role like that, I end up staying abreast of all the tech stuff and what are the new
Mm-hmm.
trends, what are people spending money on, and where's the time and energy going. So generative AI has been, no shortage of my focus for the last year and a half, 2 years. Um, and I think there's a this shift over the last 6 months, especially, of people in the first year is like, this is awesome, this is going to change everything. We don't really know anything more than that, just that it'll change everything. People started focusing on like, what will it actually change? What are the actual use cases that we should be focusing on? So the conversation I've seen shift at organizations, really into the where is the immediate bang for our buck? Where should we be building these POCs? Not just playing with it, but like thinking intentionally about where do we
Mm-hmm.
align use cases? What's the highest value? So you see a lot more papers coming out around um, what are the best use cases for AI? Where's the best ROI? What's the most promising areas um, of investment? And I think they all have this kind of low hanging fruit focus, right? This short time scale. Um, what do we have data for now? What are the regulatory environment, not going to squash immediately? What can we
Mm-hmm.
do with limited change impact to our people to recognize some ROI so that we can tell our shareholders or our, policyholders that, hey, look, here's stuff we're doing to improve our efficiencies and improve your profitability, premium costs or whatever. Because everyone's wanted to jump on that buzz train. And I think the real what I like to think about are the big meaty problems, right? The ones that keep people up at night. One that's been, taking some mind share for a long time. I think for 5 years or so is this discussion of this big talent cliff, right? That we have a silver tsunami. I've heard some people talk about it, right? Of aging boomer workforce retiring, and then
Mhm.
with that, a lot of people leaving the workforce, and that being especially true in insurance, where the recruitment of young millennial Gen Z talent is challenging, not
So
because it's hard to recruit them, but because they're not as interested, right?
let me pause you for just a quick parenthesis. So as we're recording 2024, we've been talking about this upcoming retirement crisis for 15 years. I wrote a book about it 7 years ago,
Okay.
and it's here. Like it is definitely here. 2024 is peak 65. So we have more boomers turning 65 this year than any year in the past and than any year in the future. Already, the bulk of the labor force is millennials and Gen Zers. Right
Mhm.
now, the bulk of the leadership is boomer. And in our industry, boomers are, or at least a few years ago, I don't have new data, but at least 3 or 4 years ago, uh, just before COVID, basically, the boomers were overrepresented in our industry by about 30% compared to the average industry. And why? Because insurance is a fantastic industry to work in. People tend to stay forever, sometimes at the same company. I have met so many 30 plus years in the company people all over the industry. In fact, at Liberty, which was my last carrier stop, I actually worked with a guy named Skip, and we celebrated his 50th anniversary at Liberty before he retired in his 80s. Uh, Great guy, so yeah, we have a lot of those people in insurance, and they're very quickly retiring now. So anyway, just I would just wanted to give that extra
Well,
context of how big this is.
it came to my attention specifically, I think in 21, I think it was 21. There was a Chamber of Commerce report, right, with where they like surveyed the Association of Mutual Insurance Companies. I'm sure you're very familiar with the stat,
Dynamic, yeah.
but the listeners might not be. They said that by 2036 that 50% of the insurance workforce will have
Mhm.
retired,
Yep.
and that at that time, 25% of the industry was under the age of 35. So
Oh, and you also mentioned the difficulty in attracting young talent. Okay,
yeah,
so it's super interesting. Okay, nobody grows up wanting to work in insurance. Just
yep,
like a reality of our world. Uh, Nobody grows up wanting to work in insurance. We do have a few that come into the industry with a risk management and insurance degree, an RMI degree. Now, out of the 3,500 to 4,000, somewhere in there, schools and universities in the US, only 70 of them, 70, have a risk management program. In many cases, it's not even a major. In many cases, it's a concentration of the finance program. Uh, if I had to guess, there's probably 2,000 business schools in the US. I don't have an exact number, but what I can tell you is that 100% of those business schools have accounting, finance, marketing, management, right? Kind of the core business degrees. Most of them probably have a transportation logistics or what is now called uh, supply chain,
yep.
right? Many of them, my own degree, management information systems. Only 70 of them have a risk management program, and even those kids that graduate with an RMI degree only feed 15% of our needs, 10 to 15% of our needs on any given year. So 85 to 90% of us come in with no insurance education prior to our first insurance jobs. I would guess about half of those have a business degree. The other half, the island of misfit toys, history, psychology, anthropology, communications, philosophy, you name it, we have them all in insurance. And they tend to have great careers here. Okay. And even the kids that come here with an RMI degree, they didn't go to school. 99.9% of them didn't go to school to get an RMI degree. They went to a school to get a business degree at a school that happened to have an RMI program, and then they got recruited into the RMI program by Gamma Iota Sigma having a free pizza event and a great speaker, and they got recruited into the program. And now,
Yeah.
like they won the lottery. None of them regret the program, but that's not why they went to that school. Okay. So people historically have fallen into insurance by accident, and historically they've stayed in insurance out of loyalty and out of a sense of, if I leave the company, it damages my reputation, it damages my resume. Also, they were a little bit hard to identify in the world before LinkedIn became what it is today. The world today is the exact opposite. There is zero damage to your career for changing companies, and it is very easy to identify people that, for example, underwriters with 3 to 5 years of experience and a CPCU in hand are the hottest commodity in my world. Right? I know so many kids, anybody younger than me. I'm 41. I know so many 28, 29-year-olds that have changed jobs 3 times since graduating college and are now making 150 grand working from home. It's insane, right? But that's how much demand they're in, right? Actuaries, similar story. Okay. But the point being, historically, people fall into insurance by accident, and then they stay out of loyalty. Millennials and Gen Zers won't stay out of loyalty, right?
Well,
Okay, so
I think that's interesting. There's an interesting stat I saw as well, and that um, when I was just prepping a little bit for our discussion today, that I saw a 22 McKinsey report that said in finance insurance, so it's obviously a little bit bigger bucket, but in finance insurance, that 65% of workers that have or left, or 65% of all the workers who left either left insurance entirely or finance insurance entirely, or changed to, or left the workforce entirely, right? Like they moved, they retired. And I think that part
mm-hmm,
of that's going to be skewed by that larger,
mm-hmm,
you talk about like that 30% skew towards older workforce. But there's something interesting there too, as well, about people who leave insurance for greener pastures. And I think those greener pastures are often for a younger workforce have, like, I think where you might be headed is, social benefit and impact, like mission
mm-hmm.
statement kind of stuff,
Yes,
right?
yes, 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 yes. Okay, so
Or just sexy tech, right?
mhm,
Like needing to
yes.
leave to do something cool in tech, because those skills, right, that you're talking about, the understanding, the ability to manage and understand risk, is something that I think we'll come back to the social impact thing for a second. I'll let you talk about that. But I think it's interesting is you have a tech ecosystem that's been very um, risk friendly, right? Agile, fail, learn, pivot, iterate.
And an
And I think a
insurance
lot of
ecosystem that's
leadership
not.
there has hired and built a culture of just like, take unprecedented risks. If you burn out, it's fine. We'll, file bankruptcy and do it again. And I think they're starting to realize, as those startups are growing and maturing, they're saying like, hey, we need people who understand risk and can take good positions. And like, I think you're seeing people leave underwriting kind of roles and moving into, you know, mid-level leadership roles at tech
Mm-hmm.
companies, which I think is an interesting, phenomena.
For a deeply regulated industry that has been doing things fairly similarly for 300 years, uh, and an industry, the only industry where we don't know the cost of goods sold when we sell a policy, right? Sometimes not for years, sometimes not for decades. Uh, it is very hard to let people take risks, right? And I what I've said before, that my goal in my life, like my life goal, is to convince the insurance industry that we can continue underwriting conservatively, but let's be super progressive in systems, in training, in education, in everything that doesn't risk the balance sheet.
Yeah.
Um, so you're seeing a ton of interest from the leadership for Gen AI. How are they talking about Gen AI when it comes to their talent? When it comes to the talent cliff that we're talking about?
I I think I've seen two schemes. The one that's most concerning is the we're not. right? We're more focused on trying to figure out how do we, personalize communications with agents, or how do we use it in software engineering to expedite development, or, how do we help it do some interesting stuff around, risk identification, or appetite match, or whatever, um, subrogation, prioritization, all those different cases. Um, but the one that I think is, the if somebody does talk about it, what I often see is them talk about, well, we can just build a chat bot that lets people like ask queries of older policies and stuff. That's where I think it's so short-sighted, because it implies, one, that you know what to ask for, right? And two, that you have the data available to even do that. And so because of that, you just kind of get kicked down the road and say, we'll do some other immediate ROI stuff now. Um, and that's where people sit. And so I've been thinking about this like big meaty problem, right? This talent cliff, and trying. I in my consulting world, I've worked for tons of different industries, right? I mentioned finance, health, and insurance, but I've also done stuff in manufacturing, education, and whatever, a bunch of different areas. Um, and so I like to bring these like different perspectives of what happens in other industries to color how might you solve this problem here. And I think this is an interesting kind of light turned on for me, um, maybe 3 months or so ago, as I was thinking about this problem and talking to a client in the healthcare ecosystem. So just go on a brief journey with me, and let's talk about something that's actually, I think, an interesting simile or metaphor, I guess, depending on if I use the word as or like or not, um, about underwriting and their underwriting process. So generally, I'm going to talk in generalities. If you're an underwriter, you triage an opportunity, you assess the risk, you recommend pricing, you bind. It's not
Mhm.
that different to the skill set of the process of a physician. So if you're a physician in the healthcare ecosystem, you review a medical history, you conduct a physiological workup, so you're kind of assessing what's going on, maybe even order diagnostics, such like sending your on-site risk engineering report or whatever. Um, you're ultimately diagnosing and recommending a treatment plan. And so it's this balance of like art and science. You hear people talk about underwriting. It's the same in healthcare and in medicine. Um, and it's kind of balancing this in-depth understanding of how people's bodies operate, or how businesses operate, but with your kind of like spider senses of connecting dots that you've built over years and years of doing this. And that's the kind of thing
Mhm.
that's hard to just like learn, right? You can't just like read a textbook or read a guidebook and just know how to
Mhm.
find those things. You need to um kind of over years, and like in healthcare, they have specialized schooling where you do 4 years of med school, and then you do a 4 year residency, and
And
sometimes you
yeah,
do
the,
2 year
the
fellowship.
residency is okay. You've got the academic knowledge. You've proven that you have the academic knowledge. Now we're gonna train your spider senses
Yeah,
in a real setting while being very closely supervised.
yeah. So let's talk about how to use that inspiration to talk about how to develop talent. So I was talking to this healthcare company. It's a big provider in Canada, and they were curious about the idea of how they could use generative AI to improve the residency program. In their mind, they thought there was something there because AI is buzz everywhere. So they had this idea and had a problem statement that their resident, the way it works is they have a resident, or the attending, right, the physician who's like the teacher. The attending has a cohort of 3 to 5 attendings. Um, any given
Th-
time, they follow them around, and they,
three
you
to
know,
five residents following
three to
the
five residents, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, for the attending. Sorry, yes.
Mhm.
Um, they follow them around in shadow. Maybe they'll take some initial cases on themselves, and then they'll come back and report, and then the actual physician will come and do their thing, which means they have to divvy up the caseload that comes in sometimes. They end up only seeing the, Pareto principle, 80% of the cases that come in are the same,
Mhm.
20% of the normal causes. So they don't really get the edge case experiences. That's really where you kind of build your learnings.
Mhm.
Um, because you can't manufacture. I mean, this case maybe you did a little bit because this was a critical hospital, right? Like the special case hospital where they send pediatric patients who couldn't cut the normal local hospitals, so they get sent here. But generally, you'll still only get the same normal distribution of types of cases to learn against. And so you need over time to see, it takes longer to see the edge case stuff that makes you the expert, that lets you feel confident. I can diagnose everything, whatever. And so we are talking as a radiology department, and we're talking to them about, well, what if we took generative AI and we were to skim historical cases? We can de-identify the data for patient health record data and for purposes. We can skim historical cases, and we can ask, given this, the patient came in presented with blah, 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 blah. Here's the workup. Here's what the initial thing did. What would you do? And you could dictate to the computer or whatever, say, I'd order this and ask this and whatever. And then over time, it can audit with the chart what actually the real physician did, right? The actual physician did.
Mm-hmm.
And then in doing so, kind of get a sense of, it's like a simulated visit, right? Eventually, then okay, what would you order? I'd order this, MRI with these kind of cuts and this, whatever. And then it comes back and you say, what would you do now? You see it. Here's the imagery that came back. What would you diagnose this as? And, they do all that. So you have a couple of these like intercession points where you have them give feedback. And then you could use generative AI to say, okay, we use the voice processing to take what you said you would do. We compare it with the actual notes are. We can highlight things that you missed or things that you might have done differently, even down to like what billing code you would use for that, right? You get down to very tactical stuff. But ask, because it's all on the chart, and you could say, ultimately, did you get it right or not? And you could have residents do that for 4 hours out of their day, still spend some of their time going to follow a physician, do real life stuff, but they could be looking at very edge case things every day, along with these stuff they're doing in the day-to-day, and build this like deep repository. Even at the end of the week or day or whatever makes sense, you could have summarized reports of, here's the things that they often missed. Here's the things that they need improvement on. Give that as coaching guides to the attending physicians, so that when they're coaching, they don't have just like the limited interaction of, common stuff they're working against. They're working against a knowledge of, when confronted with unique challenges in the areas they often fall short. This is where they need growth and skill set development. And I think that's a really interesting way of using AI, not to replace training, but to augment training.
That's fantastic.
But it then takes me back to this workforce talent cliff challenge. And you think, if you wait until all these senior people are gone, you can't do that anymore, because you're just relying on AI to train, and this AI model can't really do the coaching and training. It can tell you what you got wrong, it can tell you what you should have done, but it doesn't tell you how do you create those connections. What are these, the life metaphors, the tips and tricks, or the real life scenarios that people use that imprint in their brain on why it's this way, or why you should do that, or why this is important to consider, or whatever, that personal touch comes from, because it can't reason. The system can't reason, right? Generative AI is basically just bits and bytes projecting what the likely response is going to be. So
it needed to be built yesterday. Right.
It
Best
needs
time
to
to build it is right now.
Yeah, and this is where it's interesting, right? Because to do that, everything we just talked about, right? I just talked at you about. To do that, you need data that is pretty robust. You need a data ecosystem that tells you, here's the information that the submission that came in. Here's all the ancillary loss runs in history and business context. Here's the third-party data we ran and pulled from. Here's what the appetite guide was at that point in time. Here's what the pricing decisions were, or here's what the rating came back, and here's what levers we pulled for pricing, and here's the mods we applied, and here's the the price target we were working against, and here's where we gave debits and credits, and here's like you need all of that, and then ultimately you probably also want the ultimate profitability of the policy, right? Like,
and
years later was the ultimate profitability.
So hold on. I'm a former middle market underwriter. The where we gave credits and why, that is particularly interesting, because the technical reality in a perfect world,
Yeah.
the tech what in our heavily regulated industry, in admitted PNC, we are supposed to adjust pricing always in reflection to the risk. So yes, as an
Correct.
underwriter, I can go a lot lower in price than the actuaries filed for, uh, and I need to justify it with the risk itself. Or I can go a lot higher in price, and I need to justify it with the risk itself. The market reality of a competitive insurance market, maybe less so today because we have a really hard market right now, but it'll go back to normal in a few years. The market reality is that that's not the only thing that plays into the pricing. The
Yep.
reality is that the competitive situation, my relationship with the broker, is this my largest broker, or is this a broker I don't trust? Uh, is the broker's book profitable for us, or is it not? Uh,
Yep.
are we actively trying to grow this line? Those things, right? And like, what is the broker telling me when it comes to our chances of writing the account? Right? If this is a broker I really trust, and they're telling me, hey Tony, you're coming in at 750,000, and your competitor is coming in at 680, and for the same coverages, you're going to lose this very big account if you can't get to 680. That plays into it. And
Yeah.
historically, because of how regulated the industry is, that's not how we document things. So
Yep.
basically, like, unless we document the full reality of what's going on, the system is learning from a cleaned up reality that is not the
Yeah.
reality of how we do things.
Yeah, exactly. And let's the reality there's a whole conversation there around underwriting profitability and the implication that that has on underwriting profit because actuaries are hoping that you work in their optimal models and
Uh-huh.
making all that stuff and that impacts profitability. But generally um like there's a reality of how people work versus how they're incentivized and based on how they're incentivized to work
Oh yeah. Oh
and
yeah.
how what the process dictated is or whatever. Like if those are out of alignment, there's nuance to that too. So all of that needs to be factored in. And you may not have all that information today. I mean, you don't, right? We just
You
talked about it.
don't.
You
You
don't have all
definitely
that.
don't. Yes.
You might have some of it from a compliance standpoint, but
You
you
would
don't have the whole story. And so you might need to add your own like talk track over, nuance that's not going to be
the
compliance reported,
the
but just for training
director's
purposes.
commentary from the DVD.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
both of us
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
are from the generation that had this amazing opportunity of going from VHS to DVDs, and DVDs had the
Yeah,
director's
the extended
commentary.
cut.
If
Yeah.
if you really wanted to nerd out, I think that's kind of died to the streaming age. Right. I don't know if Netflix or Max or whoever offers you the ability to listen to to the director's commentary like the DVDs did. But yes, the talk track on top. Basically, you'd have to record not only the structured data of what's happening with the policy as it's getting underwritten. You would also have to capture the unstructured data of the conversation with the broker, the emails related to this
Mhm.
policy. You'd have to capture a lot more than we currently
And
capture to really get
you
the
don't
full
need to
view.
have you don't need to have everything, right? Part of this is the art that you're teaching, right? So you don't need to have it all documented science. You don't need to have the model know everything about the nuanced relationship with the broker, but you do need to know that there's notes saying the recommended price was this and you added this credit, which should have put it here, but the risk actually said it should have been there. So that the underwriter, when they ultimately see the same data and they make a decision that follows the policy as written,
Mm-hmm.
and it flags here's a disconnect, like here's something to talk to your mentor about or whatever. You could say, hey, why would this be wrong? I feel like I followed the process perfectly and it said this, and it should have been the price like this, but we priced way under. And that person can look at the same underwriting file and say, oh, well, here's the nuance. This I see the broker here is from this major brokerage, and we have a relationship there going back years and years and years. And
They
so
have
it's
extremely good loss
probably a concession
control.
we made to keep their book.
Uh,
And yeah,
yeah,
like that's the kind of thing that is the equivalent of a medical professional saying, hey, based on what they presented, it should be this. And house Dr. House from the TV show
Love that
throwing the ball
show.
up in the air, going, it's not lupus. It's not lupus. I'm telling you, it presents as lupus, but it's not. It's
It's
something
never
else, right?
lupus.
Like that's the same context, right? It's like he
Yes.
goes looking for what people say, what they do, and how they act, like to pick up on other things. It's the same thing that you need to train on, and that's where the training needs to be. It needs to be focused there, and you can use AI to augment the like tedium of walking someone through cases that takes time and energy of a senior underwriter. Give them the you know, 10 cases back to back, have them write them all, see what the outcomes are, give a summarized coaching report to the senior underwriter, and have them like have a one-on-one dialogue around what are the, you know, the Dr. House moments that you missed here or whatever, right? Like what are
I,
the things that you could have done um that you missed, or the context that you might not have considered or factored in. And that's where you really teach the art, which is where I think a lot of the challenges
I
exist
am
in this.
so glad to
But
hear that these conversations are happening at the higher levels of our industry, because my fear, I saw I saw it happen in a large carrier that I worked at and that I loved dearly, in the claims department. And no AI needed. What happened is the following: claims got specialized in order to lower costs. They went from multi-line adjusters that handled an entire claim beginning to end to specialized adjusters that handle little pieces of the claim, right? One of them does the rental car, one of them does the liability decision, one of them does the property damage, one of them does the first party medical bill, the other one does the commercial property bill. Excuse me, the one of them does the first party medical bill. Another one does the third party BI because that's more complex. And then a lawyer gets involved, everything goes to the next level, right? There's so many hands in the soup. So with the idea of, instead of paying an experienced multi-line adjuster, I don't know, 80 grand a year, we can pay a bunch of recent college grads 40 grand a year each and have them handle a lot more claims. The problem with that approach, two problems. Number one, nobody's really keeping track of the whole thing. And the client is getting 25,000 calls and they don't know who's who. They don't understand who's who. For them, every one of them is their insurance company, which is really annoying. And number two thing that happens, I predicted this part, is because I was there in the middle. Well, this had been implemented, but it hadn't been done for a long time. And I was one of those adjusters. I was a MedPay adjuster. And my question was, hey, what happens 5, 6, 10 years on the road when the claims managers, all of whom used to be multi-line adjusters, have moved on to their next opportunity? And who amongst us is going to grow to be a claims manager if we all have such specialized experience? We're not getting the broader view. And
yeah,
it happened, right? Like they had to find, they had to bring in managers from other companies, and they had to modify the jobs so that people would get more broad experience, because the most efficient way to do claims was neither the best customer service nor was it the best way to create future leaders to run those departments, right? I worry about the AI version of that same thing happening. Basically, I worry about cost pressures, loss, uh, TCR, total, what's it called? Cost ratio. I not remember the names correctly, but basically our expense
total cost
ratios.
of risk. Yeah.
Yeah. Our expense ratios pressuring us to automate as much as possible of the easy underwriting, of the easy claims, etc. But there's always a human in the loop needed, especially for the more complicated stuff. Well, when the current very experienced adjuster and the current very experienced underwriter retire, if the next generation grew up with a lot of straight through processing and they didn't touch the simple stuff, how are they going to learn the complex stuff? Right. So I believe that there's some level of purposeful inefficiency that is needed, where basically, hey, we have the technology. Let's say 5 years from now, we have the technology to underwrite 80% of what comes in with no human touching it. But then how do our young underwriters become experienced old underwriters?
Well, it can happen if you just imagine at that point the regulatory body has caught up, which 5 years from now is a very aggressive timeline for regulatory body to catch up. But, and say, yeah, no, it's fine. These simple pass-through auto policy, you can auto, price rate, quote bind.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine. So if that happens, then there's no concept of simple auto underwriting, and so there's nobody ever needed to review it. No humans need in the loop. Obviously, it's a little more complex and more complex lines that I think it would take even longer for regulatory bodies to catch up on. But like, let's just say a large, a mid-market work comp policy or something. Like,
Exactly.
yeah, like that. I think you could, um, if the regulatory body even caught up and you could underwrite that automatically, and the company was comfortable with that, machine underwriting done automatically. There is something to be said about like there's a mental model of right now you to learn to I'll go a different direction. To learn to ride a motorcycle, you have to learn to ride a bike first. That's
Uh-huh.
probably not true, right? There's probably a reality that you could learn to ride a motorcycle if bikes didn't exist and you just somebody said, "Here's how you ride a motorcycle. I'm gonna teach you how to do it." Like you probably could learn how to do it. It's just a different way than they were taught, and so the way you teach it has to be different, right? It's not
Okay.
they have to teach it from a
So
different mental model. I
so so
don't.
ba basically, if we create better training, which is not something we're known for in our industry. So
Or honestly, any industry.
fair enough. If we create better training, and we put underwriters through more rigorous, bigger investment in training, we can get them to be solid, experienced underwriters without having to go through the lower levels of underwriting.
I That's my guess, right?
It's a fair
I
argument.
can't. Yeah. I mean, to be fair though, that argument says you're putting a bigger investment in your training, which is not unlike your purposeful inefficiency,
And
right? It's
oh,
just
this is okay. So yes, training programs in our industry really declined after 2009. And full disclosure, I entered the industry in 2009. So my experience of it has been a lot through like just chatting with people, interviewing people. Okay. But to give you an idea, if you go back to like the 80s and 90s, um Allied Insurance, which ended up getting bought out by Nationwide in the late 90s, and then they killed the brand in the last 5 or 6 years. Allied Insurance out of Des Moines, Iowa, had the famous Allied School. The way that the Allied School worked was kids got hired out of college in their local areas. So if I need a kid in the Sacramento to work for the Sacramento branch 5 years from now, I go and I hire them from Sacramento, move them to Des Moines, Iowa for a freaking year, give them an apartment, train them in all of insurance. When they get hired, they didn't even know if they were going to be underwriting, if they were going to be claims. They didn't even know that, right? They were hired to go through this year-long program to become part of a cohort in person in Des Moines, Iowa. Halfway through the year, they kind of got sorted. So I imagine a Harry Potter sorting hat,
yeah.
but I imagine it was a little more formal than that. But basically, they got okay. You're gonna do underwriting. You're gonna do claims, and they did a year of training, and then they were sent back to those local branches, where those kids grew to lead those branches. And several carriers had similar programs. That's what really good training looked like back in the 80s and 90s in insurance, during a time where the assumption was we will heavily invest in you after we hire you, and you'll stay here for life, right? And then you'll retire, and like you'll come and use our gym after you retire.
Yeah.
Like I remember my time at Farm Bureau, we literally had that. We read lifelong Farm Bureau retirees who, like 20 years after retiring, would come into the beautiful campus to use the gym, because that's the kind of like paternalistic relationship Farm Bureau had with them. Okay, um, that those programs worked so well that Nationwide bought Allied in, like, I want to say 97, but I was in like middle school back then, right? So I wasn't there. Okay, but somewhere around 97, Nationwide buys Allied. Fast forward to when I joined Nationwide in 2010, the Allied kids that graduated from that training program from the Allied school are now running Nationwide, right? So like Steve Rasmussen, the CEO of Nationwide for 10 years, just retired about 3 years ago, just inducted into the Iowa Hall of Fame. Rumor is that he's retired in Scottsdale, Arizona nowadays. Got to meet him once. Graduate of the Allied program, ends up running the big Nationwide. All of the business unit presidents at the time that I was there in 09 through no in 2010 through 14, all of them were former Allied. That is the power of an amazing training program. Fast forward to 2010 when I come into the industry, those programs have largely died. I was very lucky because Nationwide still had a great training center in Des Moines, Iowa, second biggest office for Nationwide, and I got to take a lot of that training. And then I moved to home office in Columbus, Ohio, then Sacramento, California. My time in Sacramento, my 1 year in Sacramento, Nationwide still had a great top of the line training center outside of Columbus, Ohio, and I would come back. I was now at a high enough level that they were happy to fly me back once a month for training in that facility. But the investment in training has radically declined
Mhm.
compared to pre 2009, and especially compared to the 80s and 90s. But there's a reason why. This is very rational. That investment in training made so much sense back in the day when I hired a kid, I got to keep him forever. So yeah, I will throw a ton of money into your training because eventually to pay off for me. How do you
Yep.
justify that level of training in a world where the average millennial stays with you for 11 months? Now that stat is really old. It's from a McKinsey paper from like 2010. Millennials are now in their 40s, at least the oldest one of us, right? Most of
Yeah.
us are in
Well,
our
a little more
40s.
stability.
Exactly. It is like it's a little better, but the point remains. Lifetime employment is long dead. So how do we balance investing in people with the fact that chances are they won't stay with us? And on the other hand, so basically what I see in the industry today is we all fight over the same people that we've already trained. So basically like the few people that get the really good training, for example, we still have some really good underwriting training programs. The problem is no matter how much you invest in those kids, it's almost impossible to keep them long term because they become uber valuable, right? Those are the 28, 29-year-olds that we were talking
Yeah.
about that
Yeah.
are now worth 150 grand remotely. They're impossible to keep because they become uber valuable. So basically, nobody wants to train. We all want the people that everybody else trained, and it becomes a tragedy of the commons. Uh, could
It's a whole interesting.
AI slash Gen AI help us improve the situation instead of automating a lot of entry level jobs and making it worse?
There's an interesting idea. There's this whole idea of retention bonuses, which I feel are a little exploitative, right? It's like, we're going to pay for you to be trained, so you're going to have to stay here or
So,
whatever. But you could do something interesting where it's like,
mm-hmm.
hey, we're going to spend this much to train you. If you stick around for this long, great. If you go somewhere else and you get a salary at, you know, you can leave somewhere else if you like have some weird contract where it's like if you get a 50K salary bump or something, then you have to give us 10% of that for the following year. It's like we're going to invest
That's
in
an
your
interesting
training for
idea.
the industry, not
Uh,
just for the short
I
term for us.
I love the thinking. I don't know if that would stand up in court in our country with 50 different states, but it's a really
Yeah,
interesting idea.
like a
And and
performance model, right? Where
and,
like
and
if our
I've got to
training
say,
works,
I gotta say, CNA had, I don't think they do anymore, but CNA had a retention bonus for their underwriting training program. And I was not there when it was designed. I've never worked at CNA.
Mhm.
I saw its effect on the people that I mentor through their careers, chatwithtony.com. But basically, I ran into several kids, let's say between 2011 to 2018, who came into the CNA training program. And basically, the deal was the training program is 2 years. At the end of 2 years, you get your book. If you're still here, if you hit your 5-year anniversary at CNA, your contract specifies upfront that if you hit your 5-year anniversary at CNA, you get a significant bonus. I think that most of them were between 20 and 40 grand. A significant amount of money for a kid at that stage in his or her career.
Yeah.
And I believe they worked. I'm assuming that the way they were designed, CNA looked at when do we tend to lose people, and basically realized that, hey, this is how much it costs us to replace one of them. If they hit year 5, chances are they stay for 10, right? I'm assuming that that's how it was done. I don't know that for a fact. That's
Yeah.
how it should have been done. I think it doesn't exist anymore. I find it interesting how you find programs like that exploitative. I like them because ultimately, I was never in that situation myself, but several friends were. Ultimately, they were able to make a really rational decision between, do I give up the 40 grand I'm getting a year and a half from now because I'm getting a 25 grand raise right now,
Well,
or do
the
I stick
way the
around?
one that I've seen, the reason I feel like it's exploitative is what I've
Okay.
seen is you're going to get a 40 grand bonus now, and if you leave, you have to pay it back.
Oh, okay. I have not seen that in insurance, and I agree. I don't like that because I don't want anybody to ever be in a situation where they have to pay back a significant amount of money. Now,
Yeah.
uh, I'm a gamer, and I love simulation games, and I'm not much of a sports person, but the last few months, the game that has been swallowing my life, it's called Football Coach College Dynasty, and it's currently in early access. But basically, it's a text-based simulation. Very modern UI, but text-based simulation where you run a college football program. And the part that I really love is the recruiting piece. Right, I'm a
Yeah.
recruiter who
Shocking.
plays recruiting games on PC. Okay, so because in the new uh NCAA college football world, now that athletes can be paid, it's called NIL, naming, image, licensing rights,
Likeness.
right? Likeness
Yeah.
rights. Thank you. So basically, the kids can be paid, and they can be paid millions of dollars for a top athlete, right? And if they do, now that they're able to transfer between schools, uh, if they do leave, they have to pay some of that back. The piece that I don't know is, do they get the money up front, or like for example, if you're a top quarterback and you manage to, Ohio State, or you're a Purdue grad twice, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know how Purdue is doing in football nowadays, but let's
Not
I think it's more
not
of a
great
basketball
since I was
school,
in
isn't
school,
it?
but once my time it was the cradle of quarterbacks, but that
Okay,
was
so
a
so so
fun
so
time
so
before I was there.
so let's say that as opposed to Tony, who's 5'7", let's assume that Timo is 6'2", 255 pounds, and an incredible athlete, and Purdue offers you $2.5 million to go play for them, right? What I don't know is if you get $2.5 million right away, or if those get doled out every year at the beginning or at the end
Yeah.
of the year, right? I'm assuming they get doled out at the beginning of the end of the year, not right away. Because number one, you're going to get in an incredible amount of trouble as an 18-year-old with that kind of money, especially if you
Yeah.
don't come from money. Number two, if you have to pay it back, like I don't ever want to see a kid who can't transfer schools to a school that maybe like maybe you've been at Purdue for 3 years, and but you've always been the backup, and you can go
Yeah.
D2 right now and actually get a year of playing in, right? I don't want anybody to be stuck because
Yeah.
they've already spent the money, right?
Or the rest of your team around you can't perform, and you need to go play for a team to increase your NFL draft prospects
Exactly.
or
So
whatever.
so so I'm okay with that kind of retention bonus if, so for example, okay, you're getting 40 grand at hiring, going back to like insurance numbers, not football
Yeah.
numbers, right? You're getting 50 grand at hiring, but basically the way that it gets doled out is 10,000 a year when you hit your anniversary. So that if
Yeah.
you leave, you lose part of it, but you don't have to pay anything back. I think that that would be fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we're getting into the tactical details. I do like the general strategy of let's think creatively about how do we engage and retain very expensive talent. I mean, insurance talent is not as expensive as, let's say, AI talent, which is getting
Yeah.
stupidly expensive, right? But because of how bad we have been as an industry in both attracting and retaining talent, um, and our general risk averse natures, uh, it is becoming expensive, right? Like, and by the way, the post COVID remote world has made it worse because not only have we had the retirements, but also the industry has become a lot more remote friendly, right? So, for example, account managers in the agency side of in the agency and
Mhm.
brokerage side, managers are incredibly fungible. A good account manager who knows commercial lines and knows Epic or Vertifor, but preferably Epic, the number one AMS by number of users, uh, can easily get a job remotely for a different agency without having to move. So they have become really valuable because big city agencies and some insurtechs are swallowing them up, like vacuuming them up from small agencies that are less remote friendly or less able to pay them well. Uh, and I'm seeing that happen more and more all over insurance, where imagine you're imagine that you're a small carrier and you've got a couple of really cool specialty programs and an entire underwriting team, 4 or 5 underwriters that are very specialized in that one line of business, all getting hired out at the same time by the same competitor. Because before the moat that kept them here was they didn't want to move.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it is a new world we're dealing with. And I'm so glad that people are actually thinking about this.
Well,
Um,
and my call to action is to think about it, right? Like I think the tendency where we started this conversation is everyone's talking about AI right now, is talking about what can I do right now to improve profitability in this one thing so I can show to shareholders that
and
we're
it is
doing
important.
AI and then we're getting good outcomes from it.
Yeah.
And they're not thinking about what are the big, meaty, hairy problems that are going to take a little longer to build, but that we need to do foundational work now. We need to build the data ingestion and the data transformation and create ways to put that like extra bit of context into our opportunity like data model now so that eventually we can train the model to teach people so that eventually we can put together a training program while we still have people around to be the kind of the attending physician in that model, right? Like you need to be thinking about these things not just the short-term use cases but the long-term plays and placing your bets accordingly. Like don't do anything short-term for the sake of long-term, but put chips across the board, right? Um, there's a product manager kind of expert, I would say, John Cutler, who talks about this idea of placing kind of short-term, mid-term, and long-term bets. They're all bets, right? Everything you're building is a bet, but don't think of just the future or just in the short term. You got to spread them out accordingly so you can start to recognize over time, you're constantly recognizing returns, but also not falling behind in the seek of immediate wins. So,
and the interesting thing is that insurance is risk management, right? Our
yeah,
key skill set is risk management. Like we are very good at this kind of thing. It's just funny how in many cases we apply it to our book of business and not to our book of talent. Uh,
yeah.
and I had never thought of that. That is very, very interesting.
Well,
Uh,
and think about every time you've seen a early retirement or something like that, right? Those offers without thinking through, okay, what's our succession plan if all these people take it, right? Like there's just kind of always a big gamble of like, hopefully we don't lose all of our senior leadership. And then inevitably there's one area that just gets hamstrung, and so
Uh-huh.
they don't, and they're relying heavily on consulting partners or whoever, just like
Which is much more
carry them
expensive.
through, which is dangerous from a strategy standpoint.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Timo, this has been a super, super interesting conversation. We are 3 minutes past the hour. I'm afraid that I'm making you late to your next meeting, or at the very least, I'm afraid that your wife will murder you since she's watching three toddlers under three. Uh, thank you so much for your time. This has been a super interesting conversation. Looking forward to actually meet you at an in-person conference, and any other topics that you want to dig into, I'm more than happy to host an episode on it. For the listeners, if you made it this deep into the conversation, clearly you care about this stuff. If you want help with your talent, I can help you recruit. If you need help with your strategy,
Yeah,
uh,
I'll do that. Yeah. If you need to
and
talk about your talent IT strategy, talk to Tony and I together.
perfect. And if this conversation made you think of other nerdy insurance / talent conversations you want to have, and you want to come on the podcast to have that conversation, let me know. I love episodes that are something other than interviewing an insurtech founder about what their insurtech does. Then again, if you're an insurtech founder, I'd love to have you on the show. That's the number one episode we have. But I do love variety. Thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Take care.